Hi everyone, this is Gene Richards here, attorney from the Williams Law Group, and we're back on the Navigating DCPP podcast. Today we're speaking about a very important topic, that being how to get your kids back when DCPP removes your child or court takes away your child by giving DCPP custody, whether it be in a family resource home, a non-family resource home, wherever it might be. How do you then get your kids back? Before I get into the topic, I do want to remind all of you listening that no information in this podcast creates an attorney-client relationship, but we welcome any person involved with a child welfare agency, that being DCPP, to contact our office for a confidential consultation with our team. We'd be happy to help and happy to advise and happy to guide you through the DCPP process. So understanding reunification, right? When DCPP removes your child or your children from your care, or when the court confirms or agrees with DCPP's removal, or perhaps takes matters into their own hands and grants DCPP custody, what happens? How do we get reunification? How do we get, or how do you get your children back in your home? First of all, a lot of this will depend on what's been court ordered, right? The court ordered case plan. It's really the roadmap to getting your child back in your home. What is this court ordered case plan? What is a court order and what might it include? Well, the court can implement many different types of services that the court, based on DCPP's recommendations or based on perhaps recommendations of psychologists or other assessors, may recommend. And the court may say, based on those recommendations, I'm now requiring you to do these things. Let me give you a few ideas as to what may be involved in the court order or a case plan to get reunification, to have your child back in your care. First and foremost, DCPP and then the court may order you to do different types of evaluations, whether it be psychological, psychiatric, or substance abuse evaluations. And then based on the result or recommendations from that psychologist, psychiatrist, substance abuse counselor, you may have to then comply with whatever's recommended, which could include substance abuse treatment or mental health services, doing random drug screens, completing parenting classes. A big part of reunification is also seeing your child, right? Having regular visitation. If it's supervised, it's about trying to get that supervision lifted. If it's once a week, it's about getting those visits to happen more often, towards overnights, towards weekends, and getting your child back in your care. And it's about proving that you're fit and your house is a safe place for your child to reside. Now, every case is different. The steps that are required of you, whether it be through DCPP's recommendations or the court order, is going to be tailored to the allegations against you and your situation. But here is the biggest key, right? A court order, unfortunately, whether you want to hear it or not, isn't optional, right? When the court orders something, the court expects you to follow through with their court order. So the hope is to try and avoid having these things in court orders, right? For example, when DCPP does a removal, we tell the court, Judge, the removal was not needed. This child, my client's child, was not in imminent risk of harm. Therefore, the removal was not justified. Therefore, services and evaluations should not be needed to get my client's child or children back in their care. But once that battle is lost, if it is lost, because obviously sometimes the court does side with DCPP, no matter how much someone may argue on your behalf, the court is the court, the judge is the judge, and that judge makes a decision. If the court says, I believe the removal was justified, now it's a matter of figuring out what needs to happen to get your child back in your care. And that'll be based upon what's recommended, what is ordered by the court to have happen, to complete, prior to having your child back in your care. Now, these services that are in the court order, if they are in the court order and it says you shall do these things, I mean, these aren't just certain hoops to jump through or hurdles to jump over. The court, and really DCPP, want to see you actively participating, not just showing up to court and just there and sort of paying attention, but engaging what's being required of you. And that includes your services specifically. If you're in parenting classes or you're in substance abuse treatment or mental health services, parenting classes, whatever else it might be that you've been ordered to do, right? If you're doing those things, is there progress? If you're doing drug screens, are they negative? Are the screens not tampered with in some way? Because that definitely happens as well with individuals. If you're in parenting classes, are you participating, asking questions, engaged, interested? If you're in therapy or counseling, are you making progress? Are you opening up to your therapist? If you have visitation, are you showing up? You can't be in court saying, Judge, I want my child back in my home, and then you're missing every other visit. You have to make an effort by showing up to those visits, keeping that connection, and showing the division in the court. You see, when I see my child, things are good. There's no concerns. You see the interactions, the communications, it's appropriate, it's safe. Those things matter. And this is the toughest one of them all, perhaps. Are you communicating with a division worker respectfully and regularly? You see, it is important during this litigation, during removal, to communicate with the worker, right? I mean, this worker is the one providing the court with updates. There's a court report before each court appearance where DCPP tells the judge what's been happening from their perspective and what they feel needs to happen next. Is the parent being cooperative, engaging, complying with services? The more you comply and show consistency, the stronger your case becomes for reunification. And now I hear what you're saying, but Gene, before you told me don't always comply with what DCPP says, and that is absolutely true. What I'm saying is if court order says you must do things, guess what? You must do them. The arguments can happen and the objections can happen before it's put in court order. But once the court says you shall do a substance abuse evaluation and comply with recommendations from that evaluation, guess what? You better do that evaluation and then comply with recommendations from that evaluation. Now, granted, there's other ways of going about it, right? Perhaps you may say that evaluator is incorrect. I want to have a second opinion. And I can go through different trails and different scenarios here. We'd be here for the entire week. For the most part, when an order says you must do something, one, you must do that. And again, you can still combat that and try and refute that. For example, right? Say the court says you shall do a psychological evaluation. You do the evaluation, and the evaluator says you must now be in parenting classes and therapy and have therapeutic visitation with your child and many different services and recommendations. Well, you may say, Gene, I don't agree with that. Do that. Okay, well, we better hire somebody who evaluates individuals to refute and rebut what DCPP said and what the court has then required you to do, right? So there are ways to always fight back. But ultimately, when a court orders something, you have to do that, unless that order is somehow amended or changed down the road. But you have to comply with court order. Simple as that. And so the main point is this, is that if we go to court for what they call a compliance review, right? You get a compliance review in terms of, is this parent complying with court order? If you go into a compliance review and have not complied with court order, what do you think is going to happen? Will the judge be happy? Will the judge be prone to hearing your requested reliefs and saying, that sounds great, let's increase your time, let's bring your child back home? Guess what? That's not going to be the case. When you are non-compliant with court order, with court-ordered services, evaluations, etc., or even more so, visits, you can't miss a visitation with your child. This is vital to go to these visitations when they aren't in your care. When you're not doing these things, the judge is not going to be pleased. They're going to say, this is my order, this is my court order, and you're not complying with it. We can't have that happening in compliance reviews. And you see, timelines really do matter. You don't have forever to get right. Look, everyone has different situations and issues. Maybe you are saying on this podcast as you listen to me right now, Gene, I do have a drug issue. I do have an alcohol issue. I do need treatment. I do need help. And great, so let's be transparent and get that help. But you don't have forever to get that help. You can't keep pushing it back and saying, maybe I'll do it next time or next year or when something else bad happens again. When DCPP is involved, when they do a removal, the time is ticking, right? Within the first year of litigation, there's going to be what's called a permanency hearing. There's a legal timeline by which the court has to have certain hearings. They want to see certain progress, compliance, and treatment, evaluations, if they've been ordered, things like that. They want to see that, okay, this parent's making progress, therefore we don't have to put into place a potential permanency plan, certainly hope to avoid the potential of having your parental rights terminated. And if we're a year into the case and there's been no progress, it's somewhat likely, there's different arguments to make and different options to consider, but it's more likely that if you've made no progress for a year in litigation, whether it be, you're still not complying with court order, you're missing visits, you're positive on all of your tests, then it's likely the court or DCPP will present a permanency plan and say, hey, judge, the goal in this case is to terminate parental rights. The judge may say, okay, well, then there's been no progress here and non-compliance throughout the case, so therefore I'm going to agree that we should move into perhaps a potential, what we call TPR trial, termination of parental rights, where you have the potential of losing your parental rights. And I know all this sounds unnerving and perhaps harsh, but this is reality. That's why early action matters. It's important to get your case off on the right foot. And I'll give you a very clear example, a very recent example of mine in terms of why you want to get off on the right foot and you want to take action and you don't want to waste time. So I have a matter where I wasn't involved in the case for the first several months. In this case, the court, prior to me being on the case, in fact, they ordered it months ago, very early on, ordered the parent to complete a substance abuse evaluation. DCPP brought forth concerns of potential substance abuse, and although my client denies it, the court has still ordered the client to complete a substance abuse evaluation. Prior to me being on the case, nearly 4 months went by where that evaluation hadn't happened yet. Either it wasn't scheduled by DCPP or my client missed several scheduled evaluations or postponed it or things came up, different reasons, right? And so 4 months of an evaluation being postponed. And as time went on, there was no progress for 4 months. And so we have court, I get retained, we have court shortly thereafter. Now, between me being retained and having court, the substance abuse evaluation finally happened. But unfortunately, because it happened so late and took 4 months to happen, we go to court without having the recommendations. We're in court and it's great this finally happened 4 months later, but because it took 4 months to happen, we've had 4 months of no progress, no recommendations, and even now in court, we still have no recommendations. And so unfortunately, progress has been stalled because compliance with court order hasn't happened. If that evaluation happens and screens are negative and there's no recommendations for treatment, this case goes away. And this evaluation could have happened 3 months ago. We would have had recommendations from the evaluation 2.5 months ago. I may not even be on the case because we want to still be open. But because of non-compliance, right, this time frame, this case is being dragged out. And that's really a huge flaw when it comes to DCPP, right? Sometimes, let's be real, it can be the parent's fault of why things are delayed. But to be even more real, it can often be DCPP's fault as to why things get delayed, right? DCPP forgets to make a referral for something. DCPP says we requested collateral and we requested discovery from the hospital records, but we haven't gotten them. And guess what? Oftentimes, they actually have gotten them. I've had cases where DCPP actually said, I don't have anything. We don't have the records from the hospital or from your client's therapist or whatever else it may be. And you're like, one, we gave it to them directly, or the hospital said, we faxed it to you on this day and we know you have it. And then lo and behold, it is in the office, or they did get emailed it, or there is a referral that hasn't been made and they did make a mistake. And so it's important as your lawyer and really also as yourself to be on top of DCPP to the caseworker or your attorneys to their attorney and say, look, here's the documents, or look, we know for a fact it was received by your office on this day, so you do have them. Look, the court ordered an evaluation. I'm going to comply, make it happen, because the faster those things happen that are ordered, the faster your case can be resolved. And one more quick example in a case where we pushed for an earlier date for an evaluation. We said, look, make time. This is an important case. My client wants to comply with the evaluation, make it work. As soon as an opening came up for the evaluation, ended up being, I want to say, a month earlier than it was going to be scheduled for. My client gets in, it goes well, case is closed shortly thereafter. So it's important to be on top of DCPP because timelines matter. And DCPP's in no rush. They're not talking about their own kids. This is your kid who's in DCPP custody. This is your life. This is their job, and they have 1,000 cases. You have one case. That's your case. So it's important for you to be on top of your own case, you and your attorney, and ensure DCPP is following court order as well by making referrals, by having services in place. Because without that, your case gets dragged out, and it could certainly end up being a very sad ending. So I know we had a very intense episode today, and I know, as always, despite it not always being perhaps the most uplifting of podcast episodes, I want to thank you all for listening and tuning in. Just remember that it's important to really get these things done, that being what's being court ordered of you, and complying with court order, because without complying with required services and required evaluations or screens, your attorney can argue and can shout and say whatever they want to say, but when you're being non-compliant, that puts the judge already in quite a bad mood, and they'll take it out on you, not your attorney, because it's the court order is about you. It's not saying your attorney must be evaluated. It's you, and so if the order requires things to happen, it's always best that you comply with that court order. It sounds simple, but you'd be surprised how many individuals don't want to comply after it has already been court ordered. I ask you all just to continue to subscribe, share with family and friends so that those who perhaps don't know how DCPP works and find themselves in a DCPP case can have the information they need to navigate the DCPP process. In terms of resources and support, reach out to us, our hotlines, our phone lines. Look at our website, different blogs and videos for more information. Now, we discussed a very important situation today about how to get your children back. Well, how about with a removal, which is a very serious situation? What happens to your kids? Where are they going? What's next? What needs to happen in terms of where they're going? And so a lot of information, a lot of unknowns. I mean, hopefully you wouldn't know. You haven't gone through it yourself already, but it's difficult because as a parent, you're sad about your kids being out of the home, but a lot of it's because you're worried about, well, what happens to the kids? Where are they? What's going to happen next? What's DCPP going to do? And we'll address those questions and more on next week's episode. Until then, have a great week.